Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, find everything archived here at AFR and also on my website. You can follow the RSS feed. I'm on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Player FM, Podbean, and lots of other podcatchers. If there's one that you like to use that you don't hear me list on the show, then please let me know so we can throw a link up on my website, and I'll plug it here as well. I'm also on YouTube. I know that there are still a fair number of people that follow me on YouTube, so you can always find me there. And if you want to support my work, you can go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. And that $1, that single dollar that you probably, don't even think about, that gives you access to the exclusive bonus podcast that I do every month. And of course there are other tiers and other levels. People don't really seem to cash in on the other rewards. I think I need to kind of revamp the reward system. We were just talking off air about some of the Patreon woes. I've seen that several people have dropped off, and I understand that money is tight for everybody. Definitely for me as well. I do rely on the Patreon money, so if you can throw a buck my way, it is greatly appreciated. But I don't want to kind of whine on about it here on the show. I will be recording the bonus podcast tomorrow, and I will try my best to edit it quickly and post it tomorrow evening, but if not, I will post it on Thursday, and hopefully it'll be before 11:59 on Thursday night. And I know that I had said before that I was going to be doing an episode talking about Tulsi Gabbard. I am going to be doing that. I mean, that episode is basically it's ready to go in the research sense for the most part. But I thought that based on the ongoing situation in Venezuela, I wanted to talk about that for the bonus podcast. And I'm going to have on a good friend of the show, Michael Swanson, from Wall Street Window. He's going to be coming on to discuss Venezuela with me on Wednesday. I am going to be doing some more Venezuela-related shows in the near future. Probably not next week, but I think probably February 12th, the second week in February, for the live show, we're going to have Ricardo Vaz, who's a contributor and a writer at VenezuelaAnalysis.com. He should be in Venezuela on that Tuesday when we're talking, so we'll hopefully get an interesting perspective and some much needed information and clarity on what's happening in Venezuela. But that is enough from me. Today, I'm extremely excited about today's episode. This is one that has been a long time in the making, many months. It is on a particular book that I was very excited to read when it first came out, but I didn't, and I finally picked up a copy of it and read it, and we're going to be discussing it. It is a brand new, I hate saying graphic novel, but I would call it a comic by Nick Drnaso. It is called Sabrina. We're going to be speaking with a good friend of the show and a return guest, Ryan Carey. Ryan is a movie and comic critic for a variety of websites, including Daily Grindhouse, Comics Journal, Sequart, Graphic Policy. He's also, you can find a lot of his work at trashfilmguru.wordpress.com, which is one of Ryan's sites, and also fourcolораpocalypse.wordpress.com. And if you want to, another person, I encourage you all to support Ryan Carey. He has his own Patreon, which has just launched. If you go to patreon.com/4colorapocalypse, you can become a patron. I have it loaded up, and I will, probably during the break, officially sign up to be a patron of my, good friend Ryan Carey, who is a patron of mine as well. But, Ryan Carey, how are you? It's good to have you back on.
Thanks. I'm doing well, Pierce. How about you?
I'm doing okay. You might have, listeners have probably heard, I have a bit of a cold. So, forgive me, especially if you hear me, which I know is such a weird, thing when you're listening, but if you hear me breathing kind of heavily, it's just because my asthma is super bad and my nose is a little clogged. So, if you hear me taking a deep breath, I know that sounds, like the sound of that drives me crazy when I'm, if I'm listening back. So apologies for that, but I'm doing pretty good other than that. Ryan, did I get all of you write for so many websites. Did I get all of them down there?
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay, good. And you can also of course follow, Ryan on Twitter @TrashFilmGuru. But I think all of my listeners are super familiar, with your work. And we've had you on a couple of times, mostly to kind of discuss for lack of a better term, the kind of melding between the, intelligence state and comic books. We've talked about Tom King, who, maybe we'll just briefly kind of, talk about him right here. He's a former CIA agent turned, Batman, writer, quite famous. He's sort of run into some weird, I don't really want to call it trouble, but there's been a story in the news that he's sort of like stolen valor. Is that correct, Ryan?
Well, I think that's probably reaching. I think the guy who wrote that thing he's a blogger and he does okay work, but I think he was kind of trying to make a larger point that within comics, the fan circles of your more mainstream Marvel and DC comics, it's like they're looking for people to kind of shoehorn into certain roles. And King kind of fit a certain narrative, and there's nothing, and then he kind of, I'm not quite sure how to put it best. He never accused the guy of stolen valor or anything like that. He got a letter back from the CIA that was the usual we don't confirm or deny stuff. And he said, this probably doesn't prove anything either way. And then it got kind of blown up when the Comicsgate blowhards, who for some reason have a real hard-on for King. They hate his stuff. They used to love him, and then out of nowhere they turned on him like a dime, because on the last Father's Day King sent out a tweet saying, Happy Father's Day to all fathers and any single moms out there, because I guess he was raised by a single mom. And they've been worshiping King. Oh, he's this warrior, writer, creative type. And they turned on him instantly. This is a day just for us dads. Why are you ruining it? So they rolled with stolen valor kind of plot line that was never even really what the guy's point was. And his larger point is true. I mean, the recently passed Steve Ditko, the real creator of Spider-Man, was a guy who, because he shied away from publicity and wanted his work to speak for itself. He was an interesting guy. He was a hardcore Randian objectivist and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right.
He liked his work to speak for itself, and he didn't do interviews. And but he was in the New York phone book. How many people are still listed in the phone book? When people would stop by his studio, he would greet visitors and chat with them and stuff. He was affable. But comics, the fan scene portrayed him as this crazy old Greta Garbo-esque recluse, which he wasn't. They like to make Alan Moore, even when he's making good points, some crazy old wizard. It's like they have these predetermined roles for people. And Jack Kirby was, the guy who, there would be no superhero comics today without Jack Kirby. He came up with everything, right? Towards the end of his life, they portrayed him as this crazy old bitter crank and stuff. So the guy's larger point was that King's narrative was kind of being sold and he was being shoehorned into a role, and it got all blown out of proportion over this stolen valor thing that was never really his larger point about anything.
Right. And again, I mean, King has produced them in the past, and he, again, showed these now. I mean, there are pictures of him in Baghdad. I don't think anyone's really doubting. He was absolutely there. Now, what he was really doing, I mean, God only knows.
That's an excellent question. And also, I mean, the comics press didn't really bother to vet the guy's stories or anything, and that kind of fits into what I was saying before about how fans have these predetermined roles they want to slot people into and stuff like that. So I'd say far be it from me to defend Tom King, whose writing I'm not really a big fan of on the whole, but at least his Batman stuff's a mess. But I think he got kind of dragged into a controversy not of his own making with that whole thing.
Totally. And it's so funny too. I mean, you said that, and we made a point of this, I think, when we first discussed Tom King many episodes back. But yeah, that just the no vetting. I mean, that's kind of par for the course, I think, when it comes to a lot of fandom out there. I mean, they're not going to look too closely. But it was funny that people seem to think that Tom King serving in Baghdad was cool. Again, as if being in the CIA and, I don't know, running around a foreign country, spying on people, manipulating people, probably killing, torturing people, that was all just kind of what a cool, that's so badass. And now he's like a comic book. I mean, again, it's fulfilling that sort of the kind of childlike Arrested Development of many people in the comic culture.
No question about that. And the thing that I've always kind of found a little bit head scratching is like when King was announced for Batman, which was a big publicity rollout, right? That they didn't really point to his previous comic work, even though it had been highly praised. His earlier stuff, Sheriff of Babylon and The Vision and stuff, had garnered huge critical accolades. Instead, they made a big deal like, we've got this ex-CIA agent working on Batman. Right. And that kind of thing, I mean, DC is inviting a little bit of scrutiny with that sort of backward-ass publicity. I mean, promote the guy based on his work, which was tough because there was no real, like we'd mentioned at the time, there was no real sales track record backing up his stuff. It had gotten a lot of acclaim, but he'd been on low-selling titles and suddenly got the biggest prize that, half a dozen probably creative teams were trying to land.
Yeah, entirely right, which I think raises all sorts of questions about, his career trajectory. But I think we'll leave it there for Tom King. And in a lot of ways, that sort of side of the comics culture has always kind of turned me off a bit. I mean, I was never really all that into the superhero, Marvel or DC. We've talked before without nerding out too much. I was always a big fan of like Image Comics. And indeed, the comic that we're going to be discussing today, Nick Drnaso, Sabrina, is certainly a departure, both artistically in terms of the drawings and in the subject matter from the work of Tom King, and even like the work at like Image Comics as well. And,
this is what the pretentious among us would call auteur comics.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Fred, just out of curiosity, because you're more in tune with this world than I am, would you call it a graphic novel? I just hate that term.
You know what? You have to, in the terms of, I'll put it to you this way. Like when I assemble this was a great year for comics, okay? Don't think for a second. I think that the last 2 years have been two of the best years for small press independent comics in a long time. Self-published stuff, which has always been more my wheelhouse than the superhero bullshit. And so when I'm putting my list together, I've got to do one that's just top 10 original graphic novels, because that's what the publishing community has kind of saddled us with that term. I would call it, and this sounds a little bit pedantic, but the term I like for a big book that's one story like this of comics is I just call it a comics book, because it's a book of fucking comics.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I would call it a comic. The term graphic novel always it just seemed like a term. It's a term that people use who don't really like comics. It's kind of like people that smoke American Spirits don't actually like cigarettes. They just like the image, of smoking cigarettes. So they smoke American Spirits, which taste disgusting. So I've always found that people, it's the same like people that like drink IPAs. It's like you don't really like beer. You like the idea of it because, a good Pilsner will always beat out an IPA. But, now that we've offended, American Spirit IPA drinkers who, and like, it's people that smoke American Spirits that drink IPAs love graphic novels.
Yeah.
But let's get into, this comic book, Sabrina by Nick Drnaso. Ryan, why don't you kind of, give the listeners, I guess just sort of like a rundown about, what this book is, and also the kind of the splash that it's made in the media because, this, there was just I think you sent it to me a few weeks ago, maybe a New Yorker article profiling Drnaso. Sabrina itself has gotten quite a lot of attention, including the Man Booker, award. It was long listed for that. I don't believe it's on the short list. But that's an award for, books, not graphic novels, not comic books. So tell us a little bit about, Sabrina. What is the story of Sabrina?
All right. So we'll dovetail back a little bit, just a few years. Nick Drnaso is a cartoonist out of Chicago who I first found his work in a little, I believe it was self-published. I'd have to go back and pull it out, and that's not going to happen right now. But I think it was self-published, a little mini that he did about a kid who was working on a summer work crew. And we won't get too much into it, but I mean, it was an excellent story. It really showed a lot of command of, this was the guy who arrived exactly knowing what he wanted to do with the medium, which is not something you can say for every cartoonist out there. And so what's the old saying? He showed up fully formed, that kind of thing. So eventually he had 5 or 6 of his shorter works assembled into kind of a thematically linked book called Beverly. And unlike Sabrina, Beverly's not the name of a person. It's the name of this kind of soulless, suburban, interchangeable town where they all live. And that came out from Drawn and Quarterly. I believe it was 2015. And it was one of the better reviewed books of the year and was certainly showed him to be on his own wavelength in terms of the kind of stories he was trying to tell. There was sort of a bleakness to it that isn't unlike what you'd find with people like Chris Ware or Dan Clowes, but he also kind of had a sense of the humanity of all his characters too, which is something that not all of those guys, the earlier cartoonists, certainly Ware, who's probably been the most influential cartoonist on people of Drnaso's generation, for good and ill. Certainly Ware kind of has sort of a almost, what would I say, borderline contempt or either that or pity for his characters, one or the other. And Drnaso looks at them as full human beings, so I give him full credit for that. So there was a lot of, Beverly did well in terms of making a splash, selling well for the kind of small press numbers that it does, and garnered a lot of attention in the outside world, as we would call it, us comics folk. So there was quite a bit of anticipation for his next book, which he spent a couple years working on, and it's Sabrina. And what I found is when you consider a lot of he's sort of shown to be a little bit prescient with some of these things, in that some of the points that he's making, you have to consider he probably wrote and drew a lot of these pages about 2-3 years back before, in fact, I think he'd mentioned that Trump was elected while he was working on the book. And
I think towards the end of the book.
Right, and that so much of this stuff deals with so much of I guess, why don't we say this now? We'll predicate this that this is going to be a spoiler-heavy talk.
I think the entire, yes, I mean, we should have let in with that, but yeah, this is a spoiler-heavy show. We will be spoiling all of Sabrina. So if you haven't, there's no way to discuss it without kind of exploring the entire book. So yeah, if you are interested in reading Sabrina, which I encourage everyone, they should actually go and read this. definitely before listening to this, but it is worth reading in general. Maybe stop now, but continue, Ryan.
Okay. So as we get into the plot here, we're introduced first to Sabrina and her sister, Sandra, who are at their parents' place. And it's implied, at least I got the impression, that somewhere back in the past, within the last few years, Sandra had some sort of a mental break. Did you get that vibe too?
Yeah, I kind of even thought maybe Sabrina had some issue, but yeah, certainly that Sandra had something had happened, some sort of trauma in her life.
Yeah. So they're staying or visiting the parents' place. I think Sandra seemed to be staying there. Sabrina's living with her boyfriend, who we don't meet. And they have, I would say a pretty good naturalist sort of discussion in terms of nothing seems forced. The dialogue's very authentic. It feels like a pretty solid piece of writing, two women talking. If you don't like people sitting around tables talking, this book's going to drive you nuts.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of what it is. And Drnaso's art style is such that you have to focus in on the subtleties. Characters are usually drawn with rather blank expressions, so you have to look for slight variations, and they communicate really volumes if you're paying careful attention.
I was reading about Drnaso is talking about spending, like an hour changing the curvature of someone's lip in a in a particular panel. Like the detail of it. It's phenomenal in the sense too that the drawings are very simple, but these like little tiny variations, just a tiny, the smile just shifted a few degrees to one direction or the other conveys quite a lot of emotion. But I'm sorry, Ryan, I stopped interrupting you.
Oh no, that's fine. I give him credit. The economy of lines that he uses is just crazy. I mean, here's a guy who in any given panel, he might only be using a dozen lines to draw the entire picture.
Yeah.
That's takes some real skill. So anyway, they have their conversation. They decide they're going to take a late summer, early fall kind of a bike trip, kind of around the Great Lakes type of area. They live in suburban Illinois somewhere. And that's the end of that. And turns out that's kind of a prologue, because next we meet a guy named Teddy who has, again, had some kind of trauma befall him, and is headed to Colorado Springs to crash with an old high school buddy who is in the Air Force out there. And these basically become our two main protagonists, Teddy and Calvin. Calvin is estranged from his wife, who has split for Florida with their daughter. So he still harbors some kind of idea that he can get his family back together and things like that. They both seem like pretty reserved people. There's no real hint as to what has happened to Teddy and why he's coming to stay there at first, until Calvin is talking to his boss at the Air Force Base. I think that's supposed to be a stand-in for Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, but they never name it explicitly. And he explains to his boss at his office job with the Air Force that his buddy's staying with him because his girlfriend is missing.
Yes.
And he's kind of had a freak out and doesn't know what to do, so he's leaving town because she's been missing for a matter of weeks, if not months. And understandably, if you're not going to be one of these private online sleuths, you're maybe better off divorcing yourself from the scenario and letting the cops do their job, that kind of thing. So he comes out to stay with Calvin, who they haven't spoken a whole lot, it seems, since high school, but they had a conversation, it turns out, the night before Calvin asked his wife to marry him, that I guess the implication is that the encouragement of Teddy sort of prodded Calvin to give him enough fortitude to go ahead and pop the question. At least that's the impression I got. So
which backfires too.
Yeah, it didn't work out, but that's sort of so that kind of kept their connection going, despite the fact that they don't appear to talk much. When they do talk, it appears to be significant. So Teddy is sort of just a shell. I mean, he doesn't talk much. All he wants to do is watch TV and order pizza and that kind of thing. While Calvin is dealing with his own issues as far as his estrangement from his family. For the usual reasons that he's kind of mentally and emotionally absent and the kind of things that sound like cliches but actually do come into play out there in the real world. So I think that if I'm remembering the chronology correctly, then the next big plot development is that before Teddy even hears about it, some guy Calvin works with, who was probably his friend, whose name escapes me, I think it was Connor, his buddy, shows him something, and Connor and Calvin end up we'll get into that a little later. Connor shows him this internet video that gets leaked. Actually, this scene I thought was great. Drnaso cuts to a small town newspaper in the middle of nowhere. Remember that part?
Mm-hmm.
And some workers there, some staff beat writers are talking, and they're like, oh, we've got a videotape in the mail. Oh, do we even have a VCR anymore? And they go through all the motions of finding a VCR, putting it in, and then we never see what's on it. You just kind of hear like an, oh shit, we better call the cops. Next thing you know, this video's leaked out onto the internet, and it is Sabrina's murder. The guy whoever took her, has taped her being killed, and then ended up killing himself a little bit later. Now, in between all of this, we have hints that he's kind of one of these online keyboard warriors. They never use the word incel, but he seems to kind of, didn't you get an Elliot Rodger type of?
Oh yeah, well we should also say too, just before that, they actually receive like a Sabrina's bus ticket or something like that. Her bus pass is sent back to the family. Right, so now they don't know what to make of that. Then this video emerges of her being brutally murdered. And then we find out this guy, Timmy Yancey, I love that name, this is the murderer. But yeah, he's definitely like kind of an incel type person. I mean, they make multiple references to him being, into like men's rights forums and stuff like that. Yeah. And I believe that Drnaso did actually, he modeled the Timmy Yancey after Elliot Rodgers.
Yeah. So, without using the term incel specifically, it's obvious he is. I mean, the guy's a complete, just no-count loser. He just moved into an apartment for the first time a little while ago. There's no hint that he has any job.
Mom pays for it.
Yeah, his mother appears to be paying for it, so he'd been living there. They probably just wanted him out of the house. So he goes from posting on these MRA forums and other things to committing a murder. And in one of the and then he kills himself. And then in one of the more affecting scenes, at least in my opinion, you see that Calvin goes home to tell Teddy about this before he hears about it online. And Teddy just doesn't even know what to do. I mean, he just completely flips out. He starts screaming in the middle of the night. There's a dream sequence there's a couple dream sequences in this book that I like the visual tropes that Drnaso uses to, what did you think of that, where he goes to the all dark backgrounds and the...
Yeah, I like that a lot. And with the sort of like rainbow outlines of people.
Yep. I thought that really worked. I don't know what, I talked to him for like 10 minutes at Toptic, our small press show here in Minneapolis last summer, and I didn't catch up with him at the after party, and I wish I would have a little bit, because he seems like a very affable, if quiet, but very thoughtful and interesting guy who's almost kind of bemused by his own success with this.
Yeah.
So, which all kind of came through in that New Yorker piece too, but you could tell just talking to the guy for a few minutes. And, he was tabling with some other cartoonists because I just kind of a strength in numbers thing, I think, better than being at some table by yourself and you've got to answer all these questions one-on-one, but he's very approachable, seemed entirely well-adjusted, unlike some of his characters, so.
Yeah. Well, and he's had a fairly traumatic life himself. I mean, these themes of like trauma and mental breakdowns with so many of the characters, I assume is due to his own trauma. You know, he was abused as a child by like a classmate, I think.
Yeah, neighbor kid.
Yeah, neighbor, right.
Yeah, I think the New Yorker was the first mention of that, and I did, just as a brief aside, we seem to be having a few of those. I did have some small quibbles with how that freelancer who was writing that piece for the New Yorker chose to frame the article, in terms of, it almost felt like he was trying to write a Hollywood rags to riches story without the rich. These cartoonists are not making a ton of money.
Yeah, I know. Drnaso like still works at like Whole Foods, right? Or he works like a regular 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, the amount of talent that appeared to be working at that Whole Foods that he was at for a while is amazing.
Yeah.
Because Margot Ferrick, who is a cartoonist that everybody should check out her stuff. It's entirely unlike anything else. Lane Milburn and I think somebody else. There were 2, 3, 4 just top flight emerging cartoonists working at the same Whole Foods for a while. But anyway, back to our main topic here. So this thing gets leaked at the internet. Teddy has his breakdown, which I thought was a very affecting scene, and then he starts looking around the room. He's crashing in what used to be Calvin's daughter's room. He's looking around the room for something to kill himself with, and comes upon a radio and turns it on, and that's when we really get into the thrust of how this book ties into and portrays modern conspiracy culture, because right away he stumbles on the show, which I don't think is ever named, but the host is a guy, if I remember correctly, named Al.
It's Albert.
Albert, okay. This fucker's Alex Jones.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. I thought that was an expertly written spiel that he had that lasts for like a page or two, where the guy's giving his whole rundown on the state of affairs in America and stuff. And Teddy seems to kind of quietly respond to all this and really he starts tuning into the show, but it doesn't take long before, predictably enough, Albert latches on to the idea that this whole Sabrina murder videotape conspiracy is all some, false flag type of operation a la Sandy Hook or something. And then, concurrent with this, Calvin starts receiving some cryptic, quasi-threatening messages online from folks that are reminiscent of, I think, what a lot of the Sandy Hook parents probably had to put up with, don't you think?
Oh, entirely. And again, there's direct references to Sandy Hook in the book. They call out James Tracy gets called out in this. I can't remember what his name is. It's Harry Drake. Is Professor Harry Drake in the book, who works at Florida University, just like James Tracy. The person in question is someone that at first we're just told he just gives the moniker Truth Warrior, and then later he he gives his real name, Jason Richmond, who is emailing Calvin some pretty kind of scary things, like where he says, he basically reveals that he knows where his wife is, her home address, he knows his daughter's name, where they're living. And then he, begins to, that was one of my favorite, pieces of writing in the book, is the long involved email that, Jason Richmond sends to Calvin. Cause I've gotten emails not dissimilar, to that, where these like rambling, weird, overarching conspiracies. I don't want to ruin too much of it, because that's a wonderful scene, but very accurate in his portrayal, and certainly Drnaso is talking about what some of the Sandy Hook parents had to go through in terms of this whole it all being fake and whatnot, and it begins to become more and more alarming as the book progresses, and this is sort of jumping around a bit, but the Jason Richmond Truth Warrior character might actually be living in Colorado Springs. That was sort of, there is a character who appears to be following Calvin at one point, and also befriends Teddy.
Right.
And that might be this person, or it might be Drnaso, making us, the reader, become more paranoid that everyone is sort of out to get them. What did you think of that, Ryan?
Well, I think it fits into a larger thing of what Drnaso, I think when we were talking, prior to doing this in the last few days, bullshitting back and forth on Twitter, I'd mentioned this was what I wanted to mention that I think Drnaso does exceptionally well, is that he just blows off basically Chekhov's school of writing altogether,
yes.
Which is everything that you have to introduce, every object, every person needs to play into the overall narrative. And he just dispenses with that right out the window. I mean, first thing we learn is, Calvin's got a gun in the house, and you always think that's going to come into play, but never does. And there are other characters. I wouldn't say they're red herrings so much as the naturalistic flow of the type of story that Drnaso's putting together just puts these people into the orbit of his main characters, and our own sensibilities as readers make red herrings out of them. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, and I mean, the gun, literally Chekhov's gun is constantly in Drnaso's book, and it never really comes to fruition at all. I mean, there's nothing.
Right. And the same with that, we are jumping around with that Jason guy, but he could be, there's even oblique hints towards the end, and I'm sorry for jumping to this, that it might be that Connor guy from his work.
Yeah.
Because there's that very interesting scene towards the end. Connor and Calvin have been both applying for the same job upon their discharge, which is like a security service. I'd almost call it like a tech mercenary thing. It sounds like.
Yeah, kind of like an internal investigative branch that gets sent around the. I almost thought it was more to investigate the army, but it might be to investigate incidents or crimes in foreign countries where the army is involved. But it's something like that. But it is. It also is. I mean, we should also note. I mean, it's never quite made clear what exactly Calvin does for the Air Force. I mean, he works in tech, and he claims that it's all about protecting lives and sort of data mining against the enemy. But yeah, he is prepared to go overseas for 3 years, where he's not allowed to tell anybody where he's being stationed. That's as far as we know about his job. So it's, I think, the organization that Calvin works at is a little bit more, oblique than we might, or opaque than, we're first led to believe.
Right. Now, the scene where, Calvin goes to talk to Connor, this is towards the end, but this one almost played out like a Kubrick scene to me, in that he's going down this long row of servers. And it's kind of silent, and it's very clinical and austere, and then Connor's waiting there for him at the end. They've been competing for this job. First, Calvin was kind of a shoo-in. His CO wanted him to have it. But Calvin has kind of harbored dreams of reconciling with his family and going to Florida, and this job is in Chicago, if I'm remembering correctly.
It might be. I can't remember if it's ever stated where the job is.
Okay. Yeah, you might be right. Well, it isn't in Florida. It's somewhere else. But he's walking down the hall. I thought a Kubrick shit right away with that particular scene.
Yeah.
And there's Connor there at the end, and he starts talking to him like, this harmless IT, is that what you really think you're doing? No, this is top secret shit. Can you live with the things you're gonna have to do? I mean,
killing people and
kill them, all this stuff, and goes on and on. It's like, and kind of uses some of the same language we've seen in the email harassment that he's gotten from this Jason Richmond. And then Connor's like almost about to lose it. Didn't you feel like?
Oh yeah.
The tension in that scene was really good. It looks like he's just about to lose it. Calvin's about to lose it, and then Connor's like, I'm just shitting you, man. Congratulations.
Yeah. Right. I'm a little bummed out, but, good luck. I know that was a really creepy, weird. I mean, he says, you know, you're going to find out about 9/11, and you might even know who really killed Sabrina. You know, bringing it right to him, and that's what makes Calvin freak out.
Yeah. And then when he does leave town to take this gig, he has his Connor and his wife and kids move into his old place, his condo on the base, right?
Yes.
And he takes the mail as he goes, and he goes and stops in at somewhere or other, and opens his mail, and there's something in there that's like, we know where you're going.
We'll always know where you live.
Yeah. And so he ends up crashing at some fleabag roadside motel that night, and suddenly there's knocking on the door, and you think, oh, shit, you know, is this because this is so near the end of the book that you think maybe something's finally coming to a head here, and it turns out it's a drunk domestic situation.
He's got the wrong door.
Yeah, the old man is banging on the wrong door that he thinks his wife is in. Yeah, it's just, and concurrent with all this, Teddy's got his own trajectory that sees him, becoming very attached to a missing cat. And then getting in with an animal shelter that he ends up working at.
Mm.
I don't know if you're, this should all be fairly fresh in your mind.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's sort of where we leave, Teddy, after this, which I guess we should explain again. It's hard to, I don't want to like go piece by piece every single arc in the book itself. I mean, a lot is going on throughout this. I mean, Teddy begins to unravel more and more. He basically gets to a point where he doesn't leave the house at all. Sometimes he barely even leaves his own room. He's just in his underwear eating burgers at night, listening, nonstop to this talk show host talking about how, which is crazy because there's this Drnaso does a really great job of showing the kind of like the isolation and but at the same time the intimacy of Teddy's descent into the conspiracy culture, because he is completely alone. I mean, he stops talking to Calvin, he stops getting dressed, taking care of himself, yet and he's all alone. Yet at the same time, he seems to be having this extremely intimate relationship with this radio host through like a little portable radio that he literally sleeps with in bed. It's like next to he puts it under his pillow, so and it's like talking right into his ear. So it's this like oddly intimate yet isolating experience with Teddy, that kind of and he gets worse and worse, and and then eventually, he tries to find Calvin's cat goes missing, and Calvin, which seemed to be sort of indicative of his general behavior, is kind of like, oh, whatever, I don't care. I've got more important things going on, and he just sort of is quite flippant about it. And Teddy becomes obsessed with finding the cat, and eventually, 4 months later, we see, one of the panels says that, and then Teddy seems to be well adjusted, or as well adjusted as one could be, having a complete breakdown, and is working at the animal shelter, and seems to be kind of content, and at the same time, I think kind of sort of done with Calvin. I mean, that's something we can explore in more detail in the second hour. But I actually kind of hated Calvin as a character, and I actually thought that he was the most one of the most negative people in the book.
When we get to that part, remind me to address some of the larger criticisms, because it's not all been universal praise for this book. A couple of noteworthy critics have slammed it pretty hard and made some valid points. I've kind of gone back and forth. At first, when I first read it, I think this was a little bit, it was either, I think my review posted right when it came out, or maybe even a little before. I can't remember if I did it in advance. But I was quite impressed with it. Second pass through, I kind of saw the tricks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some of the visual things that Drnaso does don't strike well with me, like those panels that are almost entire pages, really, of just computer screen text. I mean, that's just, that's fine if you're writing some kind of novel, but for a comic, I don't know what else he could have done, but I'm not a cartoonist.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
If I were, I'd try to come up with something a little bit better, like maybe like he does a real expert job, I felt, early on when Calvin is talking to his daughter on the laptop and moves, the angle gets further away as his daughter just loses interest in talking to the guy. And I thought that was handled really well. If we could have seen a little bit more, even if it just amounted to Calvin sitting there in bed looking at these messages on the screen and then having like a caption box with them in it, something. Because these panels that are just screen messages, that didn't do much for me. What I did think worked was those psychological questionnaires that the guys working on the base have to fill out every day.
Yeah, those were great.
Yeah, and you can track the trajectory of Calvin's mental descent through his answers to those questionnaires every day. He goes from feeling pretty good to not getting enough sleep and being fucked in the head. Yeah. So that was, and I thought the Teddy stuff was kind of masterful in a way that you can see that Teddy is starting to doubt the stories about his own girlfriend's murder and really buy into all of this conspiracy bullshit, even though he never says a word about it. It's all
absolutely.
Radio and just through his sort of listless expressions, and then just the dogged tenacity that he sticks to this stuff with. So the missing cat really ends up offering a way out for him because he'd been spiraling down. He wasn't interacting with the real world anymore. It's like a lot of people online. A lot. You see it with all the various... look at like that Stefan Molyneux insane fucking nutcase who actively encourages his cult followers to break off from their families. Don't talk to people who don't agree with you anymore.
Just kind of where Teddy is heading.
Right.
Because there are moments where, Calvin attempts to be, like a thoughtful friend. Although, I mean, the best Calvin can do is bringing him burgers. It's also just like, I mean, that's not helping his mood, just giving Teddy junk food all the time. But, there are moments where he tries to get him to kind of talk and Teddy just, completely shuts out. He doesn't want to hear it. Now, and, cause we're getting up towards the end of the first hour. I want to mention, and again, we'll pick this up in the second hour, but we should also note that while Teddy is descending further down his own rabbit hole, which we should also point out, I mean, at the end of the book, we can discuss this in more detail. I mean, there kind of is this, very, I thought, blatant, exposure that there is no conspiracy theory and that this really might all be, kind of in our heads as readers, but also to an extent in Calvin's head. But we should also note that Calvin is also kind of going down the same rabbit hole. Now he's not listening to the radio, but he's reading all of these, blog posts and, conspiracy, site articles, and he's going on forums and he's constantly checking and seeing, are people talking about me? Because of course, Calvin, becomes, he gets called a crisis actor. There's a, which I thought one of the better scenes in it when he's, approached by this media team, these like reporters, and he says, instead of saying, I didn't know Sabrina, he says, I didn't know Sandra, who's his sister, which I immediately marked that down in my, it's like, I know this is going to come back to haunt him, cause he couldn't get it right. Crisis actor. As if they would have, crisis actors that are that bad at remembering their own lines.
Right.
It doesn't happen in the movies, so why would it happen in, CIA operations?
Yeah, it's an honest enough mistake when you consider that he has spoken to Sandra on the phone a few times. She tries to get Teddy to go to the funeral and he won't go. Right. And they have communicated back and forth. He didn't know Sabrina at all. he knows Sandra vaguely, but didn't know her before. It's an honest enough mistake to make. It's just like the hay they've made all these years over that Pullet comment about 9/11, about Building 7. Remember that guy said something like Pullet, and everybody's like, oh, he meant, whatever, or like that thing where Obama meant to say like 53 or 54 cities in the last week, and he said states, and everyone's like, I don't even know how many cities. Come on. Everybody fucks up and says something, a slip of the tongue thing.
Right. It doesn't have to mean anything, really. And again, I do find it's so funny, how, we're allegedly surrounded by crisis actors. It is the Matrix. Everyone is an agent. Only those of us that have taken the red pill are able to see it, but everyone is sort of an enemy of us, the resistance. There are crisis actors everywhere, but none of them can remember their lines. None of them are like camera ready, quote unquote. It's just sort of like, then what is the CIA and the Illuminati? I mean, what are they, they're not getting a good return on their investment.
No, Sandy took one person's gun away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
It just, the whole thing the whole mindset doesn't make any sense. But I think what Drnaso gets at with this book is that it's like a siren call to these isolated people who, we live in this atomized society now where social interaction is at a remove instead of person to person. It's all done through screens and machines, right? And so everyone is in a state of physical isolation that ends up being a kind of psychological isolation. I mean, yeah, literally, Teddy didn't leave the house for weeks until he decides to go look for that missing cat, and his same obsessiveness that got him glued onto the Alex Jones stand-in show kind of translates into how he ends up looking for this cat, and that ends up being his kind of escape valve from it all. So, his obsessive nature is a two-edged sword.
Oh yeah, well, and you can tell too that like at the end, Teddy is better, but he's not really whole yet. I mean, and it seems like I got the impression, is something like he might be living in like a halfway house. He has a fairly regimented life. He has to ask, his boss at the animal shelter very formally if he can take his 15-minute break. And you can tell too that he doesn't, he kind of wants to get away from Calvin as well. He doesn't want to get kind of sucked back into, because, and again, we can, flesh this out more, but I mean, Calvin there's something about Calvin that rubbed me the wrong way from the beginning. And he has his own secrets that he's kind of keeping from Teddy continually.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know what to make of any of that. I don't know what Drnaso was trying to say with that. But again, it once again left me hating Calvin as a character.
I feel like we got, and I guess this will dive into a little bit of where some of the criticism with this book lies, and I think justly so. Because it's not the perfect comic by any stretch. I think that we got too much of Calvin and not nearly enough of Sandra. Because Sandra has a very interesting character arc of her own. And she's the one who really is most directly affected by this on a day-to-day level. And yet she almost feels like an afterthought in the book.
Yeah, I know. There's only like maybe... we're at the break. We will continue this conversation in the second hour.
American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Quality, value, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash, no problem, no kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no down payment, no entry fee, no hidden charges, no purchase necessary, no one will call on you, no payments or interest till September. But limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary, all sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. So come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Dang it. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our experienced and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket pencil sharpener. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high quality, premium, select, gourmet, combination key ring, magnifying glass, and garden hose in a genuine imitation leather style carrying case with authentic vinyl trim. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little bit farther.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizen, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio and service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Lead control will be all out. Good control is good. 5, rocket copy. 3, 2, 1, engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are speaking with a good friend of the show and a return guest, Ryan Carey. You can find all of Ryan's work if you go to Twitter. You go to @TrashFilmGuru. You can find all of the various, linked up all of the websites that Ryan does movie and comic reviews for, including Daily Grindhouse, Comics Journal, Sequart, Graphic Policy. You can find a lot of Ryan's work by going to his website for coloropocalypse.wordpress.com, as well as trashfilmguru.wordpress.com. And if you want to support Ryan's work, I encourage all of the listeners to go out and throw some money to Ryan's brand new Patreon. And you can go to patreon.com/forcoloropocalypse to sign up. Well, we have been discussing, and excuse me while I take a sip of water here, we've been discussing Nick Drnaso's comic book Sabrina, which deals with the murder of a young woman, the violent murder of a young woman, and the conspiracy theories, I guess, that sort of follow her death, and how two of our main characters, Teddy and Calvin, process these conspiracy theories. And, I think we've probably done justice to explaining the kind of the plot, and there's a lot more to it. There's a lot of nuance in this book. So, I don't want to spend too much time in all of that. But basically, the book kind of ends with us not really knowing much about Sabrina, not really knowing much about Sandra. We know a little bit about Teddy and a little bit about Calvin, but it's never. I didn't feel like there was quite a resolution at the end of the book. It becomes fairly clear that there was nothing to the conspiracy theories, and of course, me being who I am, I kind of was hoping there would be something, but I think that's, Drnaso's point in this is, at least that much of this is sort of in the minds of, both the characters and us, the reader, as well. And I do think that, he's very clever about that in the way that he implants certain ideas in our minds, that, kind of, I think, to mess with us a little bit. But also, I think to illustrate how easy it is to fall into this sort of mindset. But I did want to, explore Sandra. This is a character who I guess is sort of one of the three major characters in the book, although she gets very little, page time. And this is sort of one of your criticisms, Ryan, and I would say it's also one of mine as well, because this is the character that is the closest with Sabrina. This is the character who is undoubtedly suffering the most kind of trauma out of anybody. And we see very little of her, and what we do see is in my opinion, just not good writing. That character is never really given a voice or anything like that. But she is attending this really strange sort of group therapy, but with a sort of an improv comedy type bent to, I don't know, or like a performance art almost. Explain this a little bit, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked. I'm in Minneapolis. You're in New York. I would have thought you guys would have a million more places like this, but I remember in my 20s hanging out in coffee shops where they'd have open mic night, and people would just go up there and talk about whatever the hell, you know what I mean? And it does turn into, for the regulars that go every Tuesday, every Wednesday, whatever it may be, they're not even doing so much performance art as just kind of expunging their demons in front of an audience. So it does become like a group therapy session, unofficially. And I'm imagining there must still be the occasional coffee shop that clings to this kind of a thing.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. I mean, I suppose those exist. I mean, it seemed like a weird way to spend, or a weird open mic night where, you're talking about, we see one of the characters talking about how, how his boss hates him and stuff, I mean, I guess though at the same time it's free, right? You're probably not paying, group therapy costs money.
I hope it's free. I mean, I don't want to pay to listen to anybody's problems.
Yeah, right, exactly. But so this is where for the most part, that's where we see Sandra. She does sort of mimic, she kind of mimics Calvin, who will, Calvin we see in several sequences kind of just like, lies to Teddy, says he has to go to work, but really he just drives around aimlessly, goes to a diner, gets some food, comes back home. We see that with Sandra also. She leaves her house, wanders around, she goes see a movie, she eats dinner alone, she eventually goes to the group therapy, but, that's kind of it. And I don't know why, it's almost like, why even include her in the book? Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
I think that she should have been a much more central figure if he's going to go down that road. I think that, here's what I think the danger you run into. Let's say you have no inclusion of her as a character. And then what you've got is Calvin and Teddy. And all that would give you is a story about two guys who are sort of victimized in a way by this kind of internet isolation culture, this kind of passive-aggressive, bordering on aggressive culture war that's unfolding on the internet that paints two guys as victims who basically, demographically speaking, guys like Calvin and Teddy are usually the ones doing most of the harassment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
That's a very, Sarah Horrocks, who's an excellent comics critic, had made this point in her review, which she just savaged the book. I'm not nearly as down on it as she was. But she's got a point that guys like Teddy and Calvin are the kind of guys who would be on the other end of the harassment. They'd be the ones doing it. So when you have no female character in there at all, I think it would kind of create this sort of false idea that these are the kind of guys who have it rough out there in the internet wilds, when usually they don't. That being said, if he's going to put her in there, you're absolutely right. He should have fleshed her out a lot more. And he didn't seem to have... It's interesting because in Beverly, Drnaso showed a real facility for writing female characters, which not all male cartoonists can do. But he doesn't even really... It doesn't seem to me that he bothers to come up with much beyond, oh, she's just suffering and here's what she does kind of thing with it. Now, I will say she gets the closest of anyone to what I would call a happy ending, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
A little epilogue thing. She goes on the bike trip that she'd planned with her sister, and sort of as a memorial thing, but also to kind of clear her head of it all, too, kind of at once. And that was an excellent little scene where he showed... if memory serves me correctly, there's not even a word of dialogue on that page. It's a silent page.
Nothing.
But you definitely get the sense that she is doing it out of respect or to honor her sister's memory, but also to kind of expunge herself of all this anguish of the last month. And if he can do that. He's a good enough cartoonist that he can do that with just illustrations. But he didn't put any meat on the bones of that character early in the book, and it's kind of an insult to her, really.
Yeah, the only other positive, thing I can say with Drnaso and the Sandra character is Sandra is also the only character who also kind of gets to say her piece. She tells Teddy, how insensitive he, or not insensitive, but how much of like a loser he really is,
right.
I did like that because I didn't hate Teddy nearly as much as I hate Calvin, and maybe we'll get into that now, but I did find Teddy, it's like, get a grip, you know? I mean, you like, when he's so self-centered, you know, it's not even about Sabrina, it's about him. You know, right. He can't handle this. And it's like, what? You know, and Sandra says, like, you could have been here. You know, we could have mourned this together. You know, like, you, like, and she even says, like, I kind of barely knew you when you were dating my sister, but we could have gotten to know each other because of this. But you kind of disappeared. You want nothing to do with this. It's all about you. She basically says, like, you're a shitty person. And, like, I hate you. I don't ever want to see you again. You know, and goodbye. Stay out of my life because you're not part of it. And I did like that. At least Sandra gets, you know, her own voice there. She finally has the agency with which to tell Teddy, you know, screw you. Thanks for nothing.
Although, if I'm remembering it correctly, we never see her end of the conversation. We just see him on the phone listening to her.
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Yeah, see, I think that would have been a lot more effective scene if maybe he'd have showed it from her perspective, making the call to him. And if you're going to only show one side of the conversation visually, since she's the one doing the talking, you know what I mean? Her points were the important thing. But instead, he focused in on the visual reaction or nonchalant reaction of Teddy to them. So I find that a curious choice that I wouldn't have went with. I think it's open for criticism.
Yeah, because it is also like, oh, poor Teddy, you know. And he even kind of is like, in that moment, there's something so pathetic about Teddy that I hated him again. You know, it's just like, because even then he's like, yeah, I know, I'm a bad person. It's like, dude, you are just like, you know, you know, just, he can't, I don't know, there was something, and I don't know if this is like cause I mean, I think it is worth picking up a copy of this. It's worth reading. Visually, it's a gorgeous looking book. The art is, you know, amazing. Say again, Ryan?
What's that?
Say again, you were breaking up there.
Oh, I was going to say one thing that people out there in your audience who don't read or whose main exposure to comics is, you know, your 6-panel grid superhero stories with your big splash pages they're going to be in for a different experience with this, which is largely told by means of 24-panel grid.
Yeah, it is, and it's a little tricky. There is, you know, if you see like 4 small panels next to a big one, read the 4 small ones as one whole thing, then move on to the next one, which I think can be a little confusing for some people.
The pages are very dense. I think the book clocks in around 200 pages, but if you were to give it like a little bit of breathing room as a story, you could easily end up with a 300-plus page, you know, with a more traditional type of layout type of thing. So yeah. It's dense, it's compacted, there's a lot of information on every page. But yeah, those are kind of some of the criticisms that I think are valid, is that Sandra should have been much tighter focus on her. Her story was probably the most interesting of the bunch. And then, yeah, sort of a woe are these guys attitude to Teddy and Calvin, who are both basically just man-children.
Yeah. Well, especially, I mean, let's get into Calvin, because I actually despised him. I thought he was a horrible father and husband, and was also just not actually a good friend either. And I don't know if this was Drnaso's point or what, but, you know, I just found him to be such an unlikable person, and that, I think, is my main criticism. You know, if I have one of the book, is not the way it handles conspiracy culture, because there are some critiques which we can get into. I think Drnaso gets wrong or it oversimplifies or what. But, you know, it's just that, like, two of our main characters are pretty unlikable, and Calvin is truly, I mean, I hated him from beginning to end. You know, he's just, he doesn't really care about his daughter, or, you know, I think he cares about the idea of having a family, you know, yeah. but there's nothing, he doesn't actually want to work on anything. and it's almost like a status symbol or something, or this is the way things should be. But he's not going to change anything in his own personal life. He's still kind of like, his like bachelor pad is kind of depressing. I mean, it's sort of like, dude, I don't even think he really has like a bed frame. He's still got like a mattress on the floor, even in his own room. It's pretty sparse. I mean, it's kind of, I understand that he works weird hours at the army base, but even so, I mean, get it together a little bit, attempt something. But he doesn't, and he seems to blame everything. Like, that was the other thing I found, Calvin is sort of like I could see him getting roped into like a men's rights thing, and I found that his descent into the conspiracies about himself and about Teddy and about Sabrina's murder was like, again, just like another, it's like, oh, woe is me, look at this. And I'm the victim. Once again, my wife left me and now these people are going after me, all because some dumb, woman got murdered. And I don't know, I found that to be truly unpleasant. What did you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I get the impression, like, there are hints, like, if you remember early on in the book, there is, when he's gonna watch after Teddy his first night there, all his buddies wanted him to come over and drink beer and play video games all night.
Right, Call of Duty.
You got the impression that while he was married, that's basically what he was doing.
Yeah.
And then, he wonders why his marriage fell apart and why his wife and kid don't really want too much to do with him. Yeah, he seems like he was a shit father, a shit husband, and doesn't even really want to take 5 minutes to figure out how to be a little better at it.
Right, and he doesn't even, it's like, I think he thought, like, Teddy would move in, and it would be like, just like a, boys' paradise. We'll just play video games, and we'll hang out, and we'll drink beer, and whatnot, and, and it's like, as much as Teddy sucks, it's like there's a profound emptiness and trauma that he's trying to process, and Calvin isn't even attempting to be sympathetic or thoughtful towards any of that.
Well, he doesn't even seem to know how to. He's like, that's such a bummer. I'm really sorry. And he does, like, when the footage of her murder comes out, he does hustle home so that Teddy hears about it from him first.
Yes.
But on that, he just seems to be enabling Teddy's worst instincts. He'll leave a bag of fucking cheeseburgers outside the door while Teddy sits there and listens to InfoWars all night.
Yeah, I know.
Like, I don't know. If I was having a rough time of it, I would not want a friend like that. Maybe for a night or two, but sooner or later somebody's got to throw some cold water on you and tell you to get your shit together.
Yeah, or at least, it's just like, right, I mean, get dressed. I mean, he's literally just in his underwear, probably not showering.
Oh, yeah, for sure not.
Like for days on end. But it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you see that with Calvin. He basically, he comes home, he changes out of his fatigues, he puts, gets in his lazy pants or his underwear, smokes cigarettes all night, playing video games, and like, looking up conspiracy theories about him. And I almost found, there's like that scene where, there's like another mass shooting. And there are several of those kind of sprinkled throughout the whole book. There's talk about it early on where, one of, Calvin's friends is like, oh, I can't even, look at the news anymore because it's all mass shootings and whatever. And they call it the Denver massacre in this. And, we see Calvin is like overjoyed because suddenly his name isn't trending anymore. And while I understand his, relief in a way, it's also like, it's just kind of like that's your response is like joy at other people being murdered because now no one's going to be talking about your, role in this false flag hoax murder. And there's just something, again, it's all about him. It's not about Sabrina. It's not about, the family. It's not about, cause again, I mean, I'm not saying if this happens to you, you should make a press statement, but he could have done something. I mean, there were news outlets that wanted to talk to him.
Yeah, the family put out a statement. Remember, they never even show it. But early on, the family put out a statement through a Facebook page, they said, and just left it at that, which is probably the best way to handle this thing in terms of you hate to put it this way, but a public relations type of standpoint.
Sure.
Here's our statement. Leave us alone with our grief. Let the investigation go where it's going to go. But Calvin and Teddy both have that thing in common where they're both so isolated within themselves and don't really even know how to interact with each other, even though they're sharing the same space. I mean, I got the impression that Calvin was leaving the house just to get the hell away from Teddy.
Because he didn't want to talk to him.
Yeah, but didn't have the balls to tell him to get his act together.
Right. Well, it's in the same way that it appears that, like, what's Calvin's interaction with his friends? Going and playing video games.
Yeah.
Going and staring at another screen. All they do at work is stare at screens. Monitoring whatever communications. And then let's go play Call of Duty all night. And keep in mind too, like, he works from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m.
Yeah, he's got some kind of crazy shift. I don't know if it was quite that late. I think it might have been 4 in the afternoon to midnight or something.
Oh, okay, maybe something like that. Yeah. Or it might have been 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah, it could be.
Again, he seems so right, and I think it's true. I mean, there's this he doesn't want to help Teddy. He doesn't want to tell Teddy to, get his act together. It just, like I said, I mean, I found him so unpleasant, that it didn't ruin the book for me, but it certainly was I almost wanted Teddy to go berserk and kill him or something, I mean, that's so dark, but,
that's a fresh take on things I hadn't heard before.
And let's just briefly explore. Calvin also has this, and I'm not sure if this was another one of Drnaso's kind of red herrings, and I don't know if it really succeeded. But Calvin has his own kind of secrets, and there's this, there is sort of a conspiracy about Calvin that Teddy begins to unravel. He keeps the guns in the house. That's never made exactly clear.
Right.
He says it's for protection.
Yeah.
From what? They live in probably one of the safest, areas you could. It's like they're right next to an army base. I mean, it's implied that most of the people in this town either work at the base or work for the base.
That's the truth about Colorado Springs, man. It's an Air Force town all the way.
Yeah. Doesn't he point out there's Mount, that's where NORAD is. I mean, it's a secure area. I don't know that he needs maybe, a handgun. I don't know why he needs a shotgun as well. But he has both. And, he also gets this mysterious package, which he immediately hides in in the ceiling, in the laundry room in his, condo. And we don't find out about that until much later. It turns out to be a gas mask. And then we also find that he's like a prepper. And he's got a go bag along with the gas mask. But then his garage, which we've never seen until this one scene, is filled with food to last through the apocalypse and the impending race war. And I wondered if this was also sort of contributed to his marriage dissolving. I didn't know what to make of it. I mean, it seemed, it was interesting and it kind of gave a layer to who Calvin was, but I don't know that it really succeeded because it's where does it go from there? It was just another thing that kind of made me hate him.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, to go back to your question, did that have something to do with the dissolution of his marriage? This is going to sound like a weird answer, but I sure as hell hope so, because anybody who'd hang around with somebody like that have to be as crazy as they are. You know what I mean? So I think that it was part of it. I mean, I I can't imagine that if I showed up tomorrow with 20 years worth of freeze-dried food and a bunch of survival supplies that my wife would be too pleased, you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, just imagine like the amount of money he spent on it.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem to be like an animating part of his character so much as it is like he knows there's something wrong and that he's got to kind of keep it a little bit of a secret. He knows it's kind of makes him a weirdo, but at the same time, again, he's not doing anything about it. I mean, he's so totally passive, you know? And it's like, if your life was that empty and they dropped a nuke, what the fuck would you even want to survive for?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's sort of, more of his sort of, I'm a man, I'm going to survive, this like very weird kind of, and at the same time, slightly, and I mean, I'm not trying to like discourage people who are like preppers or what, I mean, to each his own. I don't think it's not like a terrible idea to have like an exit strategy if there's like a natural disaster or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's also like, is he going to start killing people who want to come and get his food? I mean, and it's also like, I'm not even sure what his end game is with it anyway.
I mean, you know the kind of people I socialize with online, so I don't really know any type of prepper types. But here's just a side question I've always wondered, right? All these like escape and survive type people or bug out of the U.S. if things go to hell are all the same people who support a fucking wall. So what are you going to do? You know what I mean? If you want to get out of the U.S. and you're headed south, I mean, let's get real. A wall is there to wall you in.
Oh yeah, not to get too off topic.
Yeah, I just bring that up quick.
No. I was just going to kind of add on to that, and it's funny because and I mean, and I'm sure my listeners know the type of people that I hang out with or talk with on Twitter. I mean, I don't know many preppers either, but I do find it funny. Yeah, it's the type of people that are constantly, afraid of whatever the dollar is going to collapse and that's why we should buy gold in the apocalypse because gold is going to be super useful. I mean, the whole, I just don't really, it's so funny people say, oh, you can't eat, you can't eat paper money. It's like, you're going to eat gold? Like that's always like a retort that people have. But, and it's funny because so many of those people, maybe still are fans of Ron Paul. And I have a lot of issues with Ron Paul, but he has said some interesting things, and certainly in the past, I think before he kind of sold out more or what have you. I mean, he said one thing that was extremely prescient, and this was like many years ago. This was like back when he would run for president, and he really was just like a joke candidate, at the GOP debates. But it was at a time when, the whole question of like, oh, build the wall. And this is like maybe almost 10 years ago, if not more. And of course, all the candidates were, yes, build a wall, and they were each, mine would be, 10 feet bigger than Rick Santorum's and so, oh, Gingrich, oh, mine would be even bigger with, barbed wire. And Ron Paul said, what if this wall isn't to keep people out, but to keep us locked in? And of course, none of them had any kind of response to that. The journalist moderating the debate. Well, okay, well, thank you, Representative Paul. Let's move on. But I find that that has sort of escaped them. They want to be walled in. With the police and and let's bring the troops home so they can keep us caged in. I mean, and not to get too off topic, but it's just heed some of Ron Paul's more intelligent, prescient things. I mean, I think, it's exactly what the wall is really about, is keeping us in.
Yeah, they can go ahead and blow off just about everything else the guy has said in the last decade. That'd be fine. But
yeah. Well, no, it's just so funny that they're not going to pick up on that, They'll harp on about all these other things, but they're not gonna, which I think shows you the state of, the like libertarian, kind of, conservative alternative movement is just has fallen so far from, what they once were, which wasn't even all that great either, or had a lot of problems.
I think, and I might be wrong, but I think this dovetails back into what we are ostensibly talking about here with this book, which is that a lot of these online movements, and basically libertarianism has become kind of an online circle jerk now too, right?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. I've never been too plugged into it, but
it is definitely not what it was, say, 5-10 years ago, for sure.
Something totally interesting too that's a side thing, which is like Drawn and Quarterly, who publishes this out of Montreal. Like, they publish two of the biggest libertarian cartoonists around.
Really?
Yeah, they do Peter Baggs books, and he was now look, Peter Baggs stuff in the 90s and shit was hilarious when he did Hate with Buddy Bradley. And just his whole take on Slacker and Generation X culture was just spot on. But now he's doing like comics biographies of like authors and things like that. He did Zora Neale Hurston, and now he's doing.
Oh yeah.
He publishes through Drawn and Quarterly, and then Chester Brown is a guy who is big in the. Basically, he's obsessed with the fact that he never got married, doesn't want a girlfriend, and just hires hookers all the time. And he's a guy who put out a book called Paying For It, all about his experiences as a John. And another one he put out about prostitution in the Bible. He's a very skilled cartoonist, but he's obsessed with only like two things in the world, religion and sex work. And he's also big on trying to prove that there's no such thing as human trafficking and, just all this shit. And he's a consistent, year in and year out, libertarian candidate for office in Toronto.
Huh.
Yeah. It's weird.
That's fascinating. I did not know that about Drawn and Quarterly at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally speaking, they're kind of reputed for making these kind of highbrow art comics, right? Which is generally their stock in trade. Certainly they had a killer publishing year. I mean, they put out that collected edition of Jason Lutz's Berlin, which is 22 years in the making, and they had a lot of good feathers in their cap. Their box set of Julie Doucet's Dirty Plot is just amazing. Anybody who wants my idea of what like two awesome, flawless comics are, Berlin and Dirty Plot. And you can get them both from Drawn and Quarterly. But yeah, they have this weird like undercurrent in their publishing. Maybe it's because these books, Baggs' books and Chester Brown's books, bring in a different crowd and sell a little bit more. I don't know. But they're funded through, partially through Canadian government arts funding, so they can't be that hardcore of a libertarian. But they published the two biggest hardcore libertarian cartoonists on the planet.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, that might make for another episode. Just looking at that.
Yeah, I never got the impression that Tom Devlin down at Drawn and Quarterly was a big libertarian. He's probably not, but somehow he's ended up publishing, like Bagg for years was the house cartoonist for Reason magazine. I mean,
okay.
Even people that aren't familiar with the name would recognize his stuff instantly because he draws the people with the spaghetti-like limbs. And anybody will recognize a Pete Bagg cartoon, and he's a very talented cartoonist. But yeah, he's both him and Chester Brown are libertarian as hell, and that is their publishing home.
That's very, very interesting. That's something we could explore on another episode for sure. Back to Sabrina, right? That's where you go when you start looking at the preppers and all of that kind of stuff. I guess like what we've got roughly 30 minutes left on the show, and I do want to kind of devote a little bit of time to some of the larger issues that Drnaso talks about in this, because I think that by and large, the praise over the book in terms of capturing the kind of malaise that so many people find themselves in, and the the pit that can be conspiracy theory, I think is there. I think he captures that really well. You can tell that he's spent at least some time in that world researching it, maybe being part of it, I'm not sure. Certainly, looking at it, and, he's said in interviews that he's, used to listen to, I guess in research, you listen to Alex Jones all the time. And he captures a lot of that really well. Like I said, I mean, this email, that gets sent to Calvin is I mean, I've gotten those emails before.
Sure.
I'm sure you have as well. But
you're near on the scale you have, but I mean, I get some unglued people, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
You to think that they know where to find you beyond, it's like, you haven't proved anything beyond that you found my email address,
right,
which anybody can. But they want you to think twice, like they can track you, as if these people generally have the balls to do anything. But they want you to feel like you're being watched, and you're, it's that whole, what do they call that, gang stalking thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, the victimization complex that some of these nut bars have is really something, when they're the ones doing most of the harassment,
Oh yeah, totally. Well, exactly. I mean, there's this sort of like misplaced, like they feel like they're doing the right thing, and like again the character that we see in Sabrina, Jason Richmond, the truth warrior. But really all he's doing is just causing pain. And you can tell he's probably already harassing Sandra and everyone else, in her family.
He assumed that much, yeah.
And again, and he says like, I feel bad for you. I know that you're probably part of the New World Order and the system, but just, come on, just between me and you, tell us the secrets, set yourself free. And when he doesn't, he freaks out on him.
But it was interesting that Drnaso certainly plotted and to a great extent had already drawn almost this entire book before things like Pizzagate, which resulted in hundreds of people with nothing to do with anything getting harassed by incel losers online. Before even the term incel was really a known thing. I mean, he'd come up with all this, so he spotted the trends. He was a little bit ahead of the curve, and then by the time that the book was published, he was right in the flow of everything that was going on. So the timing worked well for him. And yeah, I think as a cultural snapshot, it's a depressingly accurate look at a lot of people's lives. The answers are easy. All of these guys have to do, Calvin, Teddy, all they really have to do is just suck it up and get their shit together. That's all there is to it. But they don't. Teddy comes closer, like you said, but by the end of the book, there's really no hint that Calvin's learned a damn thing from the whole thing. It's too bad that his stalker, whoever it may be, seems to still be on his ass. But beyond that, I don't care much what happens to him. He wasn't at all sympathetic as a character.
No, entirely. Like I said, I kind of, I liked it that he was still kind of tormented. And that it sort of made him run away yet again from his problems.
Sure.
And it's kind of like, his marriage fully implodes towards the last third of the book.
Yes.
But even that is like, he still could have done something, I mean, cause he basically almost like maybe he wanted this to happen, in some weird way. So then he can just kind of completely wash his hands. I don't have to worry about being a dad or a husband or having any responsibilities outside of whatever me, So he takes his job where he's going to be traveling around the world for 3 years doing God knows what, all secretive. And, that's his life now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And, you'll have to forgive me. I didn't listen to the whole episode you did with your sister on it, so you guys might have hit on this point already, but I've always felt that way about these incel characters, is none of them actually want to get laid even, much less have girlfriends or relationships, because it would strip them of their whole identity. All they know how to do is sit there and bitch about how rough they have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
yeah, right. I mean, that's what we said. Emma and I said, it's like, in this day and age, there's no excuse. Everyone can date somebody. I mean, it's just, there's so many apps, there's so many communities out there online and in reality, that it's just impossible that you can't find somebody, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care how, I don't care how socially awkward and stuff you are. That's like the new norm now. It's like you go to a bar sometime and look around. You very seldom see like groups of random people flirting with each other like you used to. It's weird. It's really weird. So I don't know. I did want to get into a little bit into where I think this kind of, more specifically comic-wise, fits in with some things that are going on within the medium itself.
Yeah, please, no, go ahead, Ryan.
That, obviously this is the most celebrated and most renowned of the books that are doing this kind of thing, but there is a real trend of books that are doing an excellent job of sort of capturing the cultural moment. Some, I think, more successfully on the whole than this. I mean, this one got the notoriety and things like that. It came out from the bigger publishing house, and it got long-listed for the Man Booker and all of that. But, like, when I looked back on the past year, like, there's a cartoonist named Alex Knoll out of Chicago who put out a little book, a little unassuming paperback book from Kilgore called Lawns, that's just like about a small-town sort of a recluse who just has a dog he loves. And a certain situation where this dog kind of just spirals out of control and puts him at odds with City Hall in this little town that he's in, plus his refusal to mow his lawn and other things. Anyway, it's a really excellent snapshot of how to still be a weirdo and do your own thing, and is a really terrific look at kind of life as an outcast in Trump's America that never invokes Trump or the larger scene at all. It's just about stuff in this town. And it was really, that one knocked my socks off. And then a cartoonist named Jessica Campbell, speaking of incel culture, put out a book called XTC 69. This is a sci-fi book about an all-female space crew that ends up on a planet of all guys run by a dude named President Chad. Who, like, where are the women on this planet? Well, we had to get away from them all because none of those bitches knew how to be nice to great guys like us. We're just a bunch of nice guys, but they were cold, frigid bitches. Whatever they said. Her whole book is a real sharp take on the cultural divide between. Anyway, I thought that was a terrific one. There's a guy here in Minneapolis named Sean Knickerbocker who has a self-published series called Rust Belt that he puts out a new issue of every year or two. And it's just kind of vignette stories about, he really captures kind of the bleakness of life in the small town upper Midwest. And he put out his new series, his new issue of Rust Belt this year, which was the 4th issue, was something called Internet Persona, which is about a guy who is kind of a rising star in the world of MAGA, right-wing, internet personalities. He's got a little podcast and posts on social media all the time. But, like, he has to do it all from his truck, or his car. I think it was a truck, because his wife doesn't want that shit in the house, He's a normal person. And then his big hero, like a Mike Cernovich type of guy, rolls into town. And he thinks this is his big chance to, and the Cernovich stand-in character's like, yeah, I really like your stuff, let's get together. And they meet up at some generic-ass small-town sports bar. And it doesn't quite go quite as he'd hoped. That was Rust Belt 4, Internet Persona. And I think that captured a lot of what Drnaso does in like 200-some pages Sean Knickerbocker really nailed the essence of in about 20 or 30 pages, however long his little comic is. So there is a little bit of a recognition in cartooning right now of where we are culturally and kind of addressing what it means, even how we got here, and I don't know, where we might be going afterwards, that I think is worth pointing out because it's sort of flying beneath the radar, in the talk about Sabrina. It's like the outside press, have you noticed this? Like every year, they seem to have one comic they zero in on that they think is worth talking about. And last year they got it exactly right with, My Favorite Thing is Monsters from Emil Ferris, which was just, that book will just blow your, just in terms of what she did. We're talking about someone who 15 years ago had West Nile virus and had to relearn how to draw and made the most celebrated, your favorite term again, graphic novel in probably a decade using nothing but Bic and Flair pens on notebook paper.
Mm.
So that, I think that earned a lot of the accolades, and Sabrina deserves some of its accolades this past year, but it is a problematic text in some of the ways that we hit on. And I would say for anybody who really wants to explore how comics are addressing not even so much the conspiratorial milieu, although that fits in a bit with Rust Belt, but just kind of the overall bleakness of the cultural landscape, you know what I mean? Then I would say Lawns would be an excellent one to look at. XTC 69 if you want a real good laugh out of it. And then Rust Belt 4 too. And I should say XTC 69 makes you laugh as well as think. But it's nice to see that not everyone is totally humorless about the situation too.
Yeah, because there's almost no humor in Sabrina. And it is, it is a book I think that it made me feel extremely uneasy throughout the entire read, and I was engrossed by it, but at the same time, like, I wanted it to end. I was glad when I got to the end of it. It felt like a burden had been lifted.
Yep, it's a slog. That's by intention, right?
Yes.
It is supposed to be a bit of a rough slog, and you're not supposed to. So in that respect, Drnaso was 100% successful in constructing something that makes you really think twice and be very uneasy about where American society is right now. I think as far as that goes, I think he hit the nail out of the park. If anyone wants a perfect antidote, if they do read this book and get all the way through it, and you want something entirely different, somebody who's I've been championing left and right this year and will never shut up about, and you know what, I would not even feel good going on this show if I didn't mention her stuff, is a cartoonist out of Seattle named Alex Graham. And she is creating some of the most utterly unique stuff featuring a stand-in character for herself called Angloid that is a really sharp satirization on the life of a broken, struggling artist working restaurant jobs and stuff, with a interdimensional spiritual helpers that she doesn't see, with throw in some weird people with toaster heads, weird sex, weird other stuff. I have seen every cartoonist that's come down the pipe. You know this, Pierce.
Yeah.
I've seen every cartoonist that's come down the pipeline in the last however many years. Her stuff stands out to me as the most unique and compelling and very accessible. Somebody who's never read a comic book can grab her stuff and say, holy shit, this is cool, you know? So it doesn't really dovetail with what we're talking about, but after you've read a tough thing like Sabrina, you whip out like an Alex Graham comic and your mind is set straight again, because it's like she has such a sharp satirical eye, the humor is great, but at the same time there is kind of a bleakness to her character's life too.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
It's funny too, it just sort of got me thinking, talking about, some of the comics you're just mentioning here, and the bleakness, which certainly Sabrina is, it's a bleak, sort of a book, and will leave you feeling like, the world is maybe, a pretty bleak place, although there is a little bit of an uplifting ending, with Sandra, but it's funny, you've got that in comics, and then at the same time, I think unfortunately, when people think of comics, they think of all these stupid Marvel movies. And they assume that that's the kind of, it's all superheroes and all that. But it's interesting to see both of those, like in the world that we live in right now, which I think, we can all agree on, it's not super, there's not a lot of promise, in the immediate future. And it's very interesting to see, both of the comic worlds. We've got on the one hand is all these stupid, superhero comics, which get turned into movies, which get produced by with Pentagon assistants and CIA assistants and all these other things. And then, this extremely, realistic kind, almost like to the point of like, it's like upsetting to read them. It's just an interesting dichotomy between the two.
Well, it's strange to me that at the same time that, like you say, Marvel is on top of the box office, and it looks like finally with this Aquaman and Wonder Woman stuff that DC is having their box office successes now too. So they're duking it out up there at the top, but at the same time, the small press scene and the independent, self-publishing scene even is thriving at rates never before seen. Now, granted, nobody's making a living at it, but there are more people who seem to want to express their creativity through the art form of comics than at any time I can remember in forever. It used to be I could go a month going back and forth to the comic shop and not come out with too much stuff I really like. Maybe some shit I just followed just because you follow, how it goes when you get stuck in the title. But now, you're great, I'll put it to you this way, I'm glad I'm in the review business and get so many comps, because otherwise I'd be broke.
It's an expensive hobby.
So if people are looking for, I don't want to toot my own horn only, but if people are looking for a clearinghouse of information on where to find some really interesting, different, genuinely unique stuff in an art form that has always been scoffed at but really has come into its own in exciting new ways in the last few years, then by all means follow my stuff. Follow what Rob Clough is doing at High-Low. Follow Alex Hoffman's Sequential State. Follow the Comics Journal. None of us ever run out of good comics to talk about anymore. And it used to be, it was like a fucking wasteland trying to find enough comics that were worth writing about.
Oh yeah, totally. This is sort of like revamped my interest in, because I had sort of shifted away from, smaller indie comics, and because I think they have a bad reputation amongst some, and I think that's like the kind of like the Daniel Clowes, like I just don't care. It's just like I hate that, that he's considered like, some sort of like an authority when it comes to that. You get like lumped in with, like, I never really liked Ghost World. I don't like his style. I don't like his.
Have you read Velvet Glove Cast in Iron?
No, I haven't.
That to me is prime Clowes. And also those first few issues of 8 Ball.
Yeah.
Were funny. They really were.
But this is definitely like kind of, reignited my interest, reading Sabrina in like the comic scene as like because I do think that, like when you really get down to it, like cartoonists, comic writers and stuff are like super in tune with, how society is shifting and moving. And you'll see that they really, cause they're not only writing about this, but they're drawing it as well. There's like you kind of get both, sides of this. You get a much clearer picture. So it's well worth looking into. Very quickly though, Ryan, remind everybody where they can go to follow all of your work and where they can go to support you as well.
Shit, I feel like I'm spread out everywhere these days. But if you follow me on Twitter, @TrashFilmGuru, that'll have links to most of my stuff. I'm up every week at Daily Grindhouse with a comics column.
Excellent. And you can go, of course, to patreon.com/4color-apocalypse to support Ryan. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will be talking to you next soon.
Okay.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms. Because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
Everybody talking about gun control. Gotta get rid of the guns. I like guns. You got a gun, you don't have to work out. I ain't working out. I ain't jogging. You don't need no gun control. You know what you need? We need some bullet control. We need to control the bullets. That's right. I think all bullets should cost $5,000. You know why? Because if a bullet costs $5,000, there'll be no more innocent bystanders. Every time somebody gets shot, you'll be like, damn, he must have did something. So they put $50,000 worth of bullets in his head. And people would think before they kill somebody, if a bullet costs $5,000, man, I would blow your head off if I could afford it. I'm going to get me another job. I'm going to start saving some money. And you a dead man.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is going to be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okey doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow, friendships to flourish, with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Good control is good. 5, roger, copy. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.